Well, thank you so much, ladies. You know, over the years, it is likely that most of you have had some interaction with, and at the very least, the awareness of the annual project of Samaritan's Purse that we know as Operation Christmas Child. And you're aware that the premise is pretty simple, and that is to collect as many shoe boxes for little boys and little girls that have Christmas gift-type items, toiletries, some basic necessities. And these items will be gathered, these boxes amassed and shipped and distributed to some very remote places in the world where it is likely the little boy or little girl who is getting this could be maybe the only gift that they ever get. And so, again, you're probably aware of that. Some of you have, in varying ways and varying degrees, participated in that whole process. Some of you might have been to one of the Operation Christmas Child distribution centers, or the hubs. Like, for example, I remember working in the one in Charlotte before where, literally millions of boxes are coming in there. They have to be sorted and then packed and put on pallets, get ready to be shipped out. Maybe you've participated in something like that. If you haven't, it's likely, though, that you have, at one point or another, put together one of these gift boxes for a little boy or a little girl. And so if you're like me, you have sought to do this at various points over the years, and oftentimes the goal is not just to do a box, but you'd like to do as many as you possibly can. But when you start thinking about, well, there's all these items that need to go in there. There's some basic toiletries. Maybe you'd want to add some socks or a flashlight, a toy. You start putting all this together, and that box can get quite expensive. And every year they keep asking for a little bit more money to get it shipped. I think now it's $1,463 that they're asking to include in that box to get it somewhere. Anyway, so you're thinking about the cost of this, and so what has happened, I believe, while the goal is to be a blessing to these little boys and these little girls in these places around the world, and that as these boxes get there, hopefully as part of that, there's a gospel presentation that is able to accompany that, so they get this gift, but they hear about the greatest gift ever, which is, of course, Jesus. That's the aim, that's the goal. In my estimation, though, perhaps the greatest winner in the entire Operation Christmas Child enterprise is this: the Dollar Tree. The Dollar Tree every year counts Operation Christmas Child as its greatest blessing. It is the gift for them that keeps on giving. Because, as I said just a moment ago, you're thinking about gathering all of these items to put into a box. And many times you're trying to think, I want to do one, I'd like maybe a boy and a girl, or maybe two boys and two girls, or whatever it is. And so you're thinking, I need to get all this together, but even though it's just a shoebox, very quickly the amount of that can get quite expensive. And so you go to the Dollar Tree, and all of that stuff, virtually everything that you would want to put into that box. You can buy washcloths, no, you don't buy toilet paper. You could buy toothpaste, a toothbrush, a comb, a brush. Beyond that, they have toys over there. And so you can do all that. You can include a flashlight, you include some toy or toys, some crayons, all this stuff. And that's wonderful. And so you get this box packed and you ship it off, and you're so grateful. You've done a good deed. And the great thing about this, thanks to Dollar Tree, that good deed did not cost an arm and a leg. That's great, unless you have the awareness that some of us, especially those of us that have parents of small children, have, which is this. At any point, especially my younger kids, I could take them to the dollar store today, and it is certain that they would go over to the toy aisle with great anticipation and expectation, and they will find an item or two or 10 that on that toy aisle they would want. And maybe they catch me on a weak moment and I actually buy some of this. One of the things that I have learned is do not let them open it on the way home. Why? Because Dollar Tree toys have a life expectancy of about 3.5 minutes. And so at least if I get them home with that toy, I could say the toy at least made it home. And so here's my thought, and I recognize the positive, meaningful, good intent behind this. It does kind of stink to me because I'm aware, as you probably, if you think about it, there are millions of kids around the world that are going to get a shoebox from Operation Christmas Child, from somebody that was thinking a positive thought about them, want to do something nice for them. And they're going to be so excited, and they're going to open this, and there's going to be all these things in there, maybe the only gift that they've ever gotten in their life so far. And maybe their eyes are going to land on a toy, and my goodness, this is going to be so fun to play with. And then about 11 seconds later, gone. Gone. It looks like a great gift, but it's got no lasting value. 3 weeks ago, I began a Christmas series, thinking about the entrance of Jesus into the world and how His coming into the world really represents a dividing line, even in how it is that we measure time. That Jesus' birth changed how we measure time from BC to AD. And that's significant to be sure, but for most people they would say, well, that doesn't matter a whole lot. I'm not even writing on a check 2020 AD. So a big deal. He changed how he measured time. But we have been thinking about the fact that it becomes a big deal because Jesus didn't just measure or change or affect how it is that we measure time in a general sense. That in the life of a person that comes to have a relationship with Him, He, for each of us who know Him, He changes our time, our past, and our present. And today I want you to think about how Jesus changes our future. And that His coming into the world is not a gift that just, oh, that's nice for a second or two, but it truly is the gift that keeps on giving. So our question for our consideration today is this: what effect is it that Jesus' coming has on my future? We see the answer to that question today in Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1, if you would join me in your Bibles there today, starting with verse 78. Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 78. There, Luke records these words: "Because of God's merciful compassion, the dawn from on high will visit us to shine on those who live in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." All right, so in just those two verses, I believe we find the answer to the question we want to think about today, which is, again, what effect does Jesus' coming have on my future? And based on what we see, not just in these verses, but in the broader context, it is that Jesus' coming helps me see how things truly are. Jesus' coming helps me, in an ongoing way, see how things truly are. Now, if you're paying attention to what's on your page, you probably notice that verses 78 and 79 occur as part of a larger context. In fact, a context that begins back in verse 68. You may even see a subject heading above it that's indicating that these are the words of Zechariah. Well, the question is, who is Zechariah? Well, if you start in Luke chapter 1, you're introduced to him, and that he is an older man, he's a priest, and he's married. He's married to a woman named Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is some sort of kin to Mary. Now, it has been speculated, and some have said that she's the cousin. We don't know. All we know is that they are in some way related. But they are old, well advanced in years, well past childbearing years, and she is barren. They've never had any children. But an angel comes to announce to Elizabeth and to Zechariah that they are going to miraculously conceive. They're going to give birth to a son whose name is to be John, and that this son's purpose, how God is going to use him, is that he is going to be a forerunner, laying the foundation for the long-awaited Messiah who was to come. And so hearing that this is going to happen, Zechariah is a bit puzzled, as you and I would probably be. And you would be thinking, am I just seeing something? Am I just dreaming this? Am I imagining all of this? And so he, in essence, demands a sign. He says, how in the world am I going to know that this is true? And so the angel says to him, well, from now until the birth of that child, you will be mute. My wife, this is her prayer. With every one of our children, please, Lord, let Zechariah be repeated. Anyway, for the duration of her pregnancy, the only way that Zechariah could communicate would be literally to write it down and pass notes. He couldn't say anything. And so when this baby is finally born, Elizabeth is asked, what should his name be? And she says, John. And relatives and friends, they say, well, that's a crazy name. That's not a family name. Are you sure about that? And so then they look to Zechariah as if to say, maybe you're going to overrule it. And so he gets his paper out and he writes now his name is going to be John. And finally, for the first time in 9 long months, he's able to speak. And what we have starting back in verse 68 is what Zechariah is able to say after he's been thinking for 9 long months about what he would like to communicate. And what he communicates is now as somebody who has had a work of God significantly occur in his life. He's been thinking about this for all of these months, and he begins in verse 68 with this statement of praise to God. And for the verses that follow, the first several verses, they're just kind of general statements. I don't mean general in the sense that they weren't heartfelt or sincere, but they're just general statements of praise towards God. But then by the time you get to verse 76, it's as if he has gone from talking directly to God, and it's almost as if he is holding this little baby, John, the guy that we know, or the little baby that we will know later as John the Baptist. He's holding him, and he says, "And you, child, will be called a prophet of the Most High." It's almost as if he is looking down at this little baby, and he's speaking to him. And so he does that in verses 76 and 77. But then, by the time we get to what we read at the outset with verses 78 and 79, it's as if the focus has shifted, and he's thinking now not simply about John the Baptist and what he's going to do, but about the one that he is going to lay the groundwork for, about the one whose foundation he is going to lay. And so he is talking in verses 78 and 79 about one who has not yet been born, whose name he does not yet know, but because of God's work, he knows that he's getting ready to come. He's talking about Jesus, and he describes of Jesus that he represents God's merciful compassion. He describes him as like dawn from on high that has visited us, that shines on those who live in darkness and in the shadow of death. So you kind of need all of that as preparatory background to know what's going on in these verses. But it leads us back to our question, which again is, what impact is it that the coming of Jesus has on my future? Well, based on what we see, it is that he helps me. Not just now, but even into the future. He helps me to see how things truly are. And so when he describes of Jesus in verses 78, or in 79, but in verse 78, he describes the coming of Jesus as the fruit of God's merciful compassion. So God the Father has been merciful to us and is merciful in the sense that he sent Jesus into the world, who has operated like what? Some of your translations say like the rising of the sun. The CSB says dawn from on high. So he's using a metaphor, and he's describing Jesus like light, like sun, like the light that comes up from the east and sets in the west. And even though it's cloudy today, you're able to see outside. Why? Because the sun is shining. I don't know if you've given a whole lot of thought to this, but if you go outside right now, you can see, and you can see because even though it's through clouds, the sun is shining. But that light, while it is shining here, it didn't start here. The light came from elsewhere. And that's what Zechariah is saying about Jesus. That he operates light that has come from elsewhere to shine on me, to shine on us right here, right now. And as an expression of God's mercy and compassion, he's come here, and what does he do? Well, it says that he shines on those who live in darkness. You probably don't think a great deal about this, but because every time you come into this room, almost without exception, the lights are on. Now, that's because on Sundays and Wednesdays, well, the lights are on in here, but during the week, typically this room is really, really dark. While there's some little skinny windows in some of the doors, those doors just open up to the hallways. There are no windows to the outside in this room. And so absent some lights being on, it's really dark in here. Now, this has bitten me more than a few times over the years, but during the week, I will find myself, I'll be somewhere over here, and I'll think, I want to get over there, or I need to get back to the sound booth. And so I don't want to go all the way around, turn some lights on and do that. And so I will just cut through here, and I tell myself, I will be fine. And I don't know how many times, it's more than 2 hands worth, but multiplied times, I'm coming through here, and in my mind, I am just fine, and about that time, I take one of these pews right in the thigh. Let me just tell you that sanctuary-appropriate words are not those that first come to mind because I don't know if you've noticed, when I walk, I tend to walk pretty quickly. I'm not dragging around. And so I'm hitting that pew with some force behind it. And man, that thing hurts, especially how it jabs out and it gets you just square in the thigh. Here's the question: why did that happen? And why does that continue to happen? Because I run into that pew ultimately for two reasons. I run to that pew because, obviously, I can't see. There's no light on, and so I can't see that it's there. That's one reason. But there's another reason, and that is this. Even though I cannot see, that does not stop me from attempting to get to the back. It doesn't stop me from attempting to walk. Why? Because in my mind, I tell myself, I know the layout. I know how things are. But I'm wrong. I'm wrong. And so what do I need? I need the light to show me how things really are. Zechariah, before Jesus has ever even uttered his first cry as a baby, is describing what he's going to do. And one of the things that he does in an ongoing way, as the gift that truly does keep on giving, is that he shows me and he helps me to see how things truly are. And when Jesus came and when he lived his life, he absolutely did that. He showed us through his own example that this is how it is that you are to live. And these are the expectations of God. And in truth, we kind of had it wrong because Jesus raised the bar, didn't he? I mean, previously we've just been thinking about, I need to just make sure that I do this. And if I do these actions, that's okay. I can keep it in bounds. But Jesus describes that it's more than just doing that it matters to God what's going on in the mind and in the heart. So he showed us what the standard of God is, but then he demonstrated that this is how it is actually done. So he showed us where the boundaries are, and then he actually lived an example that thankfully continues to speak to us, continues to be demonstrated, continues to work like light shining in darkness. And because he came, and only because he came, can we really see how things actually are. Because the light had to come from elsewhere, because we were, and outside of Jesus, are living in darkness. Jesus' coming helps me see how things truly are. But there's another thing that he does, and that is that he enables freedom from the fear of death. He enables freedom from the fear of death. Zechariah stays in keeping with this light metaphor, and he continues to speak about the lasting benefit of Jesus, this Messiah who is to come. And he says that he will shine on those who live in darkness and what? And the shadow of death. And the shadow of death. I want you to think with me for a moment about that whole thought, or the expression, the shadow of death. There is very much a sense in which death is the 900-pound gorilla in the room. Now, you've heard that phrase before, the 900-pound gorilla in the room. What does that mean? It means that there is something that we all kind of know. It's right there, but we're just not going to talk about it. It's sitting over there in the corner. We know it's there. We're just not going to talk about it. And in a very real way, death is the 900-pound gorilla in all of our lives. And even though we may not be talking about it, it never really goes away. And it is never all too distant from our active thought process. Now, we can try to put it out of our minds, but try as we might, it keeps coming back to the fore. A freak accident occurs. A loved one goes to the hospital. Maybe you go to the hospital and you get reminded about just how fragile we really are, and how very easily it is you could wind up leaving this world. I mean, to say nothing of the fact that we are still living in a pandemic. And it is so bizarre because even in the same family, it'll cause one person to have no symptoms at all, but another one may wind up on a ventilator and another one may actually die. We are constantly being reminded of the reality of death and being reminded of our own mortality. And while we may never, or while it may be the case that we're not actively thinking about it throughout the whole of every day, it is never a thought that is too far from our conscious thinking. It's always that we're experiencing the news someone new is diagnosed with cancer. Always somebody that is struggling with some sort of heart condition. Without fail, someone is going to, in the not-so-distant future, have a police officer show up at their house, or maybe it is that a phone call comes, or someone stands on their door to say, "I am so sorry, but your loved one has passed." It never seems to go away. And even though we don't talk about it, it's always there. It truly is the 900-pound gorilla in the room. And thinking about this pervasive awareness leads us back to the language that Zechariah uses. We never, ever get to escape this whole reality of death. And it is casting a shadow on everything that we do, every decision that we make. It casts its shadow on every plan that we entertain. And it matters that Jesus came because we are living with that shadow on us. But why does that matter? Why does that matter? Until just recently, Peter and Catherine, so that's number 4 and 5 for us, had been sharing a room. Peter just turned 5 this past week. And for several years now, the two of them have been sharing a room. And it started off okay, but over time it has gotten worse and worse and worse because it'll be bedtime. You send them to bed, and then it's like 2 hours later they're still pestering you because they're still awake. And it may be that they're bothering you because they're fighting. It may be that they're bothering you because they're playing and they're too loud, but regardless, they're still awake. And somebody's going to come in and they're going to tattle on the other. And so what Caroline has done to great effect is that she goes in there and she says, "I am going to turn off the light." And in particular, that little previous 4, now 5-year-old, he gets quiet. Do you know why? He didn't want to be in that dark room. Why? Because the dark is scary. And if you're afraid of the dark, do you know what the cure to it is? You turn the light on. And that which previously prompted and evoked fear, it goes away. What does Zechariah say about the coming of Jesus? That he is like light that shines on those who live in the shadow of death. And what does light do to shadows? It causes them to go away. Isaiah said it 700 years before Jesus ever came. Matthew repeated it when he says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Among those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined." Listen, that matters now. It matters tomorrow. And you better believe it's going to matter for eternity. Listen, we cannot escape the reality of death. The Bible tells us it's appointed to each. We all have an appointment with it. And that naturally and reasonably evokes fear unless one could come, and one thankfully has come, who lived, who died, who experienced victory over death, and then shares that victory with all who will lean on Him. That affects your present, but it'll affect your future, every day of your future, and the entirety of your eternity. Zechariah was saying that the coming of Jesus, that's what it meant to him. It truly was the gift that kept on for him giving. For me, I can say this morning that these sentiments echo my same thoughts, that I can say that His coming for me, it is the gift that keeps on giving. So my simple question for you is, what does it mean to you? Will you bow your heads with me?